In a quiet nursing home in Arkansas, 78-year-old Elliot Barnes repeats the same mysterious phone number day after day, his mind ravaged by Alzheimer's but somehow clinging to these 7 digits as if his very soul depends on it. 3, 1, 8, 7, he whispers with trembling lips, tears tracking down his hollow cheeks. What could be so important about this number that it alone survives while everything else fades away? When compassionate nurse Grace Chen discovers the truth behind Elliot's desperate mantra, she uncovers a family tragedy frozen in time for 17 years. A single night of anger, a pregnant teenage daughter forced out into the winter cold, and a lifetime of regret that's been slowly killing a father from the inside out. As Elliot's condition deteriorates, Grace faces an impossible question. Should some wounds remain buried, or is it worth risking everything to make one final call before it's too late? This heartbreaking story of forgiveness, second chances, and the bridges we build across seemingly impossible chasms will leave you questioning how long you could hold on to anger, and whether letting go might be the greatest gift you could ever give yourself. Follow our channel now, like this video, and let us know in the comments where you're watching from, because this is one emotional journey you won't want to face alone. The morning light filtered weakly through the frosted windows of Shady Pines care home, casting long shadows across the worn linoleum floors. Outside, the Arkansas winter painted Fayetteville's landscape in shades of gray and white, a stark canvas of bare trees and frost-covered fields. Inside, the facility hummed with the mechanical rhythm of institutional life. Metal breakfast trays clattering, medication carts squeaking down hallways, and the distant murmur of a television news anchor discussing another cold front moving through the south. In the corner of the common room, separated from the world by invisible walls of isolation, sat Elliot Barnes. At 78, his once imposing frame had collapsed inward, shoulders hunched as if bearing an unseen weight. His weathered hands, marked with liver spots and bulging veins, trembled violently as they clutched a yellowed piece of paper, folded and refolded so many times that its creases had nearly torn through. 3, 1, 8, 7, he whispered, his voice a brittle echo of what it once had been. Please, just answer. His clouded blue eyes, once sharp as winter ice, now stared vacantly at nothing, lost in a landscape only he could see. 3, 1, 8, 7, he repeated, the numbers falling from his lips like a desperate prayer. The paper in his grasp bore the same sequence written 3 times in different styles of handwriting, one bold and angry, one careful and measured, and the last trembling and faint. It was as if each iteration represented a different version of himself, fighting against the cruel erosion of his memory. A single tear track marked his hollow cheek, long dried, but leaving evidence of a grief that never fully evaporated. "Look at old Barnes talking to himself again," chuckled Walter Simmons from across the room, not bothering to lower his voice. At 82, Walter found cruel comfort in knowing someone was worse off than himself. Been mumbling that same damn number for years, like somebody's gonna pick up after all this time. The group of elderly residents playing cards nearby laughed, the sound of their amusement cutting through the air like broken glass. A nursing assistant walked past Elliot without a second glance, carrying fresh towels to another room. In the busy economy of care, attention was rationed to those who could still meaningfully respond. "Mr. Barnes, would you like some orange juice with your medication?" The gentle voice belonged to Grace Chen, a newly hired nurse with compassion still intact after only 6 months at Shady Pines. At 34, she wore her dark hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, her scrubs adorned with cheerful cartoon animals that seemed out of place amid the institutional drabness. Unlike her colleagues, Grace didn't walk around Elliot's chair as if he were merely furniture. She knelt beside him, meeting his gaze with patient persistence. Elliot's rheumy eyes struggled to focus on her face. 3, 1, 8, he continued, but his voice faltered as if her kindness had momentarily disrupted his ritual. From the nurse's station, Todd Buckley watched Grace's interaction with visible disdain. "Don't waste your time," he called out, adjusting his orderly's uniform. That old man deserves what he got, he knows why. The words carried a surprising venom, hanging in the air like poison. Grace's head snapped up, surprised by the unwarranted cruelty. "Excuse me?" Todd shrugged, his face suddenly blank. "Just saying. Some people end up alone for a reason." He turned away, busying himself with paperwork, but not before Grace caught something in his expression. Not just indifference, but something darker, something personal. Elliot seemed to shrink further into himself at Todd's words, his thin fingers now clutching not just the paper, but also a small, tarnished silver picture frame. The glass was cracked diagonally, splitting whatever image it contained. Grace couldn't quite see who was in the photograph, but Elliot's thumb caressed its surface with heartbreaking tenderness. "She'll forgive me. She'll come back. I know she will," he whispered, his voice suddenly clearer, as if these words came from a different part of his brain than the numbers, a part not yet consumed by the fog of Alzheimer's. Grace felt something twist inside her chest. This wasn't the random babbling of dementia. The naked emotion in his voice carried the unmistakable weight of guilt, profound and unresolved. The numbers weren't meaningless. They were a lifeline to something, or someone, he had lost. "Mr. Barnes, who are you trying to call?" Grace asked softly, placing her hand gently over his. For a moment, just a fleeting second, clarity sharpened his features. He looked directly at Grace, and the sudden cognizance in his expression was startling. "I didn't mean to hurt her," he whispered, his voice suddenly strong. "I thought I was protecting her." Then, like a candle extinguished by a sudden draft, the awareness vanished. His eyes clouded over again, and he returned to his mantra. 3, 1, 8, 7. Please answer. Grace remained kneeling beside him, her heart pounding. Whatever secret Elliot Barnes carried, it wasn't just eating away at his mind. It was consuming his soul. She glanced around the common room, seeing Elliot with new eyes. Not a senile old man lost in delusion, but a prisoner serving a sentence of his own making, desperately trying to reach across some vast divide before it was too late. His trembling hand extended the folded paper toward Grace as if offering her a key to a door he could no longer open himself. When she hesitantly took it, his fingers returned immediately to the cracked picture frame, gripping it with surprising strength. "She'll forgive me. She'll come back. I know she will," he repeated, rocking slightly in his chair. Outside, the winter sun disappeared behind heavy clouds, casting the room into deeper shadow. The metal breakfast trays were collected, television channels changed, and medication rounds continued. Life at Shady Pines marched forward in its unalterable routine. But as Grace tucked the paper with the repeated phone number into her pocket, something shifted in the universe of possibilities surrounding Elliot Barnes. His weathered hand trembled over the mysterious phone number he could never forget, even as everything else slipped away. The image froze there, gnarled fingers hovering over 7 digits that connected him to a past he couldn't escape, and a forgiveness he might never receive. In that moment, Grace made a decision. Some mysteries weren't meant to stay buried. Some calls needed to be answered no matter how much time had passed. The morning shift at Shady Pines began like any other, the harsh fluorescent lights flickering to life at 5:30 a.m., illuminating hallways that somehow managed to feel both sterile and neglected at the same time. The scent of industrial-strength disinfectant mingled with the unmistakable undertones of institutional cooking and medical necessities. Outside, darkness still clung to the Arkansas landscape, with only the faintest suggestion of dawn on the eastern horizon. Grace Chen arrived 15 minutes early, as had become her habit over the past 6 months. She found comfort in these quiet moments before the formal handover, using them to review patient charts and mentally prepare for the day ahead. But this morning, her routine was different. Her fingers kept returning to the folded piece of paper in her pocket, Elliot Barnes's mysterious phone number. She had barely slept, the old man's anguished whispers playing on repeat in her mind. "She'll forgive me. She'll come back. I know she will." The naked desperation in his voice had followed her home, settling into her apartment like an unwelcome guest that refused to leave. When she entered the common room at 6:45 a.m., Elliot was already there, though breakfast wouldn't be served for another hour. He sat in the same chair as yesterday, his posture impossibly more hunched, as if he had collapsed further into himself overnight. Today, his sweater, a faded blue cardigan with mismatched buttons, hung from his frail shoulders like a deflated parachute. "Good morning, Mr. Barnes," Grace said softly, approaching him with deliberate slowness. Elliot's head lifted slightly, his roomy eyes struggling to focus. The curtains. She liked them open. Always open, he murmured, his voice like sandpaper on old wood. Grace knelt beside him, noticing how the early morning light cast deep shadows across his hollowed cheeks. "Who liked the curtains open, Mr. Barnes?" she asked gently. His weathered hand reached out, grasping at something invisible. She would cry. In her room. I could hear her. Through the walls. His voice cracked on the last word, splintering like thin ice. I shouted, I shouldn't have. I just wanted to protect her. A fragment of memory, Grace realized, a piece of the puzzle breaking through the cognitive haze. Are you talking about someone in your family, Mr. Barnes? She pressed carefully, keeping her voice low and even. Elliot's focus sharpened momentarily. I did it for her own good, he said with sudden clarity, his gaze piercing and defensive. Then just as quickly the connection frayed. 3187, please answer. Barnes is up early again talking nonsense, came a gruff voice from behind them. Marion Winters, the facility director, stood with her arms crossed, clipboard pressed against her chest like a shield. At 59, Marion wore her administrative authority like armor, her silver-streaked hair pulled back so severely it seemed to stretch her skin taut across sharp cheekbones. He seems to be trying to communicate something about his past, Grace suggested, standing to face her supervisor. I think the number he repeats might be significant. He repeats that same gibberish every day and has been for 7 years, Marion interrupted, her tone dismissive. Don't waste your time, Grace. We have 23 other residents who can actually benefit from your attention. The harshness caught Grace off guard. But he's late-stage Alzheimer's. The connections in his brain are failing. Whatever he's saying, it's just random neurons firing. Marion's clinical assessment was delivered with the cold precision of someone who had long ago traded compassion for efficiency. Don't go looking for Shakespeare in alphabet soup. As Marion walked away, the fluorescent lights overhead caught the laminated badge swinging from her lanyard. 22 years of service at Shady Pines. Grace wondered how long it had taken for empathy to erode, worn away by the daily grind of understaffing and overwhelming need. Grace turned back to Elliot, determined to try again. Mr. Barnes, can you tell me more about... She cried. I shouted. He interrupted, his hands trembling more violently now. The door slammed. It was so cold that night. So cold. Tears welled in his clouded eyes, then spilled over, carving glistening paths down his sunken cheeks. Who cried, Mr. Barnes? Who was cold? Grace asked, her heart pounding. Elliot's response was fragmented, like shards of a broken mirror reflecting disconnected images. She was just a girl. She said she needed me. I only wanted what was best. I was protecting her honor, her future. Each phrase seemed to cause him physical pain. His breathing became labored, his arthritic fingers clutching at the armrest until his knuckles whitened. From across the room, Todd the orderly watched their interaction with undisguised irritation. During a moment when Marion was occupied with another resident, he approached with heavy footsteps that announced his displeasure. You're agitating him, Todd said flatly, though his concern clearly wasn't for Elliot's well-being. He gets like this when people encourage his delusions. These don't sound like delusions, Grace countered, keeping her voice low. They sound like fragments of memory. Real events. Todd's expression darkened. Look, I've been here 5 years. Trust me when I say this old man deserves every bit of suffering he gets. The statement carried a weight that sent a chill through Grace's spine. "What do you mean by that?" she pressed. Todd leaned in slightly, his voice dropping to a whisper edged with contempt. "Some people pretend to be good parents, good people, but behind closed doors, they're monsters." He straightened, adjusting his uniform. "Not our job to judge, though, just to keep them clean and fed until nature takes its course." As Todd walked away, Grace noticed something she hadn't seen before. He moved to a small trash can near Elliot's chair, discreetly removing what appeared to be a crumpled piece of paper, a note perhaps, and tearing it into tiny pieces before discarding it. The action was quick, practiced, almost casual, but unmistakably deliberate. When the breakfast carts arrived at 8 a.m., the common room filled with the subdued energy of morning routine. Residents were helped to tables, medications distributed, and conversation rose and fell in muted waves. Through it all, Elliot remained in his chair, occasionally mumbling his mantra of numbers, seemingly oblivious to the bowl of oatmeal that had been placed before him. During a quiet moment, Grace approached him again, determined to make a connection. "Mr. Barnes," she said, sitting beside him this time rather than kneeling. "I'd like to help you. Can you tell me anything more about the person you're trying to reach?" For several long seconds, Elliot didn't respond. Then, with painful slowness, he reached into the pocket of his cardigan and withdrew a small tarnished key. The metal was darkened with age, its teeth worn smooth in places. Attached to it was a yellowed paper tag with faded writing, H205. He pressed the key into Grace's palm, his touch as light as autumn leaves falling. "Find her," he whispered, a single moment of startling lucidity shining through the fog. "Before it's too late." The weight of the key in her hand felt impossibly heavy for such a small object. Grace closed her fingers around it, making a silent promise that she knew might be foolish, might be crossing professional boundaries, but felt inexplicably right. From the doorway, Marian's voice cut through the moment. "Nurse Chen, a word please." As Grace reluctantly stood to comply, she caught a final whisper from Elliot. "Angels punish bad fathers." That's what she said, before she left. The fluorescent lights in the staff break room buzzed like trapped insects, casting a harsh glow that made everyone look sickly and exhausted. Grace sat alone at the small table, turning Elliot's mysterious key over in her fingers. The worn metal caught the light as she examined the faded tag, H205. A hotel room? An apartment? A safe deposit box? The possibilities multiplied in her mind, each one leading down a different path in the maze of Elliot Barnes's past. Her shift had ended 30 minutes ago, but she couldn't bring herself to leave. Not yet. Not with the weight of Elliot's words still pressing on her conscience. Find her, before it's too late. The desperation in his voice had been unmistakable, a drowning man throwing his last message in a bottle. The break room door swung open, and Marian Winters entered, her face a mask of professional disapproval. She paused, seeing Grace still in her scrubs, then checked her watch pointedly. "Your shift ended at 3, Nurse Chen." Grace slipped the key into her pocket. "I was just finishing some notes on Mr. Barnes." Marian's thin lips pressed together. "I thought we discussed this morning that your fixation on Barnes is unproductive. We have limited resources here, and they're better allocated to residents who can actually improve." "With all due respect," Grace said, choosing her words carefully, "I believe there's something significant happening with Mr. Barnes. Those numbers he repeats, I think they're a phone number, and I believe he's trying to reconnect with someone important from his past." A shadow passed across Marian's face, something that flickered between irritation and something deeper, almost like concern, but harder, more defensive. "Grace," she said, dropping the formal tone, "you're new here. You haven't seen what happens when family members suddenly appear after years of absence, stirring up memories and expectations, only to disappear again when visiting becomes inconvenient." She pulled out a chair and sat down, her posture rigid. "It's cruel. And it's our residents who suffer the aftermath. But what if..." Shady Pines has policies about resident privacy and past records for good reasons. Marion's tone made it clear this was not a discussion but a warning. Don't go digging into Barnes's past. It won't end well for him or for you. The threat was veiled but unmistakable. Grace nodded, feigning compliance. But the key in her pocket felt heavier than ever. After Marion left, Grace changed into her street clothes, jeans and a purple University of Arkansas sweatshirt, and made her way back to the residential wing. The evening shift was in full swing, with dinner trays being distributed and medication rounds beginning. The controlled chaos provided the perfect cover for what she was about to do. She found Elliot alone in the small reading room, a space largely unused by most residents. He sat in a worn armchair, an open Bible on his lap, though his eyes weren't focused on the pages. Instead, he stared out the window at the gathering dusk, his expression a mixture of longing and resignation. "Mr. Barnes," Grace said softly, taking the chair beside him. He turned slowly, recognition flickering briefly in his eyes. "Did you find her?" The hope in his voice made Grace's chest tighten. "Not yet, but I will. I need to know more. Can you tell me who you're trying to reach?" For a moment, his face remained blank. Then, with trembling fingers, he reached for the Bible on his lap. The book fell open naturally to a well-worn page, and a photograph slipped out, landing face down on the floor between them. Grace picked it up carefully. The image showed a teenage girl, perhaps 16 or 17, standing on the porch of an old farmhouse. She wore a high school leather jacket, her long brown hair pulled back in a ponytail. Despite the casual setting, her eyes were red-rimmed from crying, her posture tense and defensive. She looked directly at the camera with an expression that mingled hurt with defiance. When Grace turned the photo over, she found a message written in harsh, angular handwriting. "Come home when you're ready to apologize." Her breath caught in her throat. She looked up at Elliot, who was now staring at the photo with tears streaming unchecked down his weathered cheeks. "Is this your daughter?" Grace asked gently. Elliot's hands trembled violently. "I loved her," he whispered, his voice cracking with emotion. "I did the right thing. I did the right thing." But the words sounded hollow, as if he was trying to convince himself more than anyone else. "What was her name?" Grace pressed, keeping her voice soft. "Lynn," he replied, the name emerging with surprising clarity. "My Lynn." "And the phone number you repeat, is it hers?" Elliot's eyes clouded over, confusion returning. 3, 1, 8, 7. He began again, as if the direct question had triggered his protective mantra. "It's okay," Grace said, patting his hand. "We'll figure it out." As she started to rise, Elliot suddenly gripped her wrist with unexpected strength. "I couldn't let her throw her life away," he said urgently, momentary lucidity breaking through again. "She was just a child. She didn't understand what she was doing. I was protecting her future." His fingers loosened and he slumped back in the chair, exhaustion etched in every line of his face. "But she left anyway. In the cold, she left." "I'm going to help you, Mr. Barnes," Grace promised, carefully tucking the photograph into her bag. "I'm going to try to find Lynn." In the hallway outside, Grace nearly collided with Rosemary Hopkins, one of the older residents who still had her mental faculties largely intact. At 86, Rosemary moved with a slow, dignified grace, her silver hair perfectly coiffed despite the institutional setting. "Careful, dear," Rosemary cautioned with a gentle smile. "No need to rush about like that." "Sorry, Mrs. Hopkins," Grace apologized. "I was just checking on Mr. Barnes." Rosemary's expression softened with something like pity. Poor Elliot, always muttering about angels and punishment. She shook her head slowly. "He told me once that angels punish bad fathers, over and over like a strange little prayer." Grace felt a chill run up her spine. "Did he ever mention his daughter to you? Lynn?" "Oh, I couldn't say," Rosemary replied, but her eyes shifted away too quickly. "It's not my place to speak of others' business." "Please, Mrs. Hopkins," Grace urged. Anything you know might help him find peace. Rosemary hesitated, then sighed heavily. All I know is what he said during one of his clearer days last spring. He said his greatest sin wasn't what he did, but what he failed to do afterward. She patted Grace's arm. Whatever happened between them, the weight of it is killing him by inches. Back in her small apartment that evening, Grace sat at her kitchen table, the contents of her bag spread before her. Elliot's key with the mysterious tag, the photograph of the tearful teenage girl, and a notepad where she'd written the numbers Elliot repeated constantly. 318 to 7. It wasn't a complete phone number. There had to be more digits. Or perhaps it was something else entirely. A safe combination, an address, a date. With hesitant fingers, Grace reached for her cell phone. What was she doing? Breaking facility policy, probably risking her job, definitely crossing professional boundaries. And yet, the image of Elliot's face, the naked anguish, the desperate hope, wouldn't leave her. She dialed the partial number, 318, 7, and then stopped, unsure how to complete it. Her thumb hovered over the keypad, doubt flooding her mind. What if Marion was right? What if she only made things worse? Grace set down the phone, conflict churning inside her. Outside her apartment window, the sun had fully set, leaving only the distant glow of streetlights and the occasional passing car to illuminate the night. She thought of Elliot, alone in his narrow bed at Shady Pines, probably still whispering his mysterious numbers into the darkness. I promised I would help him, she said aloud to her empty apartment, and I will. With renewed determination, she picked up her phone again and entered a different number, one for the Fayetteville Public Records Office. Tomorrow was her day off, and she knew exactly how she would spend it. The county records office smelled of dust and forgotten lives, an appropriate scent for a place that stored the paper trails of existence. Grace had spent the better part of her morning poring over property records for Elliot Barnes, her fingers growing grimy from the old ledgers and faded documents that predated digital archiving. Finally, after 3 hours of searching, she found it. A deed for a property about 20 miles outside Fayetteville, in a rural area near the Ozark National Forest. The address matched partially with the tag on Elliot's key, the H likely standing for highway and 205 for the road number. The property had been purchased by Elliot and Margaret Barnes in 1982 and had never been sold, though tax records showed years of delinquent payments with minimal penalties, typical of remote, low-value rural land. Armed with an address and a sense of purpose, Grace drove her faded blue Honda Civic along winding country roads. October in Arkansas painted the landscape in fiery oranges and deep reds, the fall foliage creating a deceptively cheerful backdrop for her somber mission. As she turned onto Highway 205, the paved road gave way to gravel, then to packed dirt rutted with tire tracks and washed out in places by recent rains. The farther she drove, the more isolated the surroundings became. Modest homes and small farms gave way to stretches of untended land, broken occasionally by dilapidated mailboxes marking invisible driveways. Her GPS signal flickered uncertainly, the screen freezing and then jumping ahead as she navigated deeper into the hills. After nearly missing the turn twice, Grace finally spotted it, a rusted mailbox lying on its side, the name Barnes barely legible on peeling paint. A narrow dirt track disappeared into a grove of overgrown pine trees. She turned slowly, the undercarriage of her car scraping against the uneven ground as she made her way down what had once been a driveway. The cabin emerged from the trees like an apparition from another time. Single-story with a small covered porch, it had clearly once been painted white, though years of neglect had stripped away most of the color, leaving the weathered wood beneath exposed to the elements. The roof sagged ominously on one side, and several windows were broken, their jagged glass teeth catching the afternoon light. Grace parked and sat for a moment, hands still gripping the steering wheel. What was she doing here? This wasn't just bending professional rules, this was breaking them entirely. And yet, the image of Elliot's desperate face, the weight of the key he'd pressed into her palm, propelled her forward. She stepped out of her car, the autumn air crisp against her face, carrying the scent of pine and decay. The porch steps creaked dangerously under her weight. The front door hung partially open, its lock long since broken, perhaps by local teenagers looking for a place to drink or by wildlife seeking shelter. Grace hesitated, then called out, "Hello? Is anyone here?" Her voice sounded unnaturally loud in the stillness, scattering a pair of crows from a nearby tree. When no response came, she pushed the door open further, wincing at the protesting groan of rusted hinges. The interior was a tableau of abandonment, furniture covered in a thick layer of dust, cobwebs stretching from corners like ghostly tapestries, small animal droppings scattered across warped floorboards. The air felt heavy with absence, as if the very molecules had grown stagnant from lack of human breath. The living room contained a sagging couch, a recliner with stuffing bursting from torn upholstery, and a small television set that looked like a relic from the 1990s. On the walls hung family photographs, their images bleached by years of sunlight streaming through uncurtained windows. Grace moved closer to examine them. A younger Elliot, tall and broad-shouldered with a stern expression, stood beside a petite woman with kind eyes and a hesitant smile. Margaret, Grace presumed. And between them a girl at various ages, a toddler clutching a teddy bear, a grade schooler missing front teeth, a preteen in soccer uniform, and finally, the teenager from the photograph Grace had found in Elliot's Bible. Lynn's progression through childhood played out on the wall like frames from a film that had ended abruptly. The kitchen beyond was small and functional, its dated appliances speaking of rural simplicity. Dishes still sat in the drying rack beside the sink as if someone had expected to return soon. A calendar hung on the refrigerator, frozen in time, November 2002, with several dates marked in now faded red ink. As Grace moved deeper into the house, she noticed something disturbing. Long, jagged marks scored into the hallway walls as if someone had clawed at them in desperation or rage. The gouges were deep, revealing the wooden laths beneath the drywall in places. She ran her fingers over the marks, a chill traveling up her spine despite the stuffiness of the abandoned home. At the end of the hallway, 3 doors stood closed. The first revealed a master bedroom, Spartan and masculine, with no trace of feminine presence. The bed was made with military precision, the closet containing only men's clothing. Margaret's things had been removed, though Grace couldn't tell if this had happened recently or years ago. The second door opened to a small bathroom, unremarkable except for the shattered mirror above the sink, its fragments long since cleared away, leaving only the empty frame. It was the third door that gave Grace pause. Unlike the others, this one was locked. She withdrew Elliot's key from her pocket, the metal warm from being clutched in her palm. It slid into the lock with a satisfying click, and the door swung open. The room beyond stopped Grace's breath in her chest. Unlike the rest of the house, this space had been preserved like a shrine or a museum exhibit. A teenage girl's bedroom frozen in time, posters of early 2000s bands on the walls, a collection of snow globes on shelves, a twin bed with a purple comforter pulled tight across it. A desk in the corner held textbooks, spiral notebooks, and a framed photograph of Lynn with friends, their young faces laughing at some forgotten joke. The room was meticulously clean, not a speck of dust on any surface, as if someone had been maintaining it all these years. Fresh flowers, now withered but clearly placed there within the last few weeks, sat in a vase on the bedside table. Someone had been coming here, tending this room like a grave. Grace moved to the desk, drawn by a notebook lying open, a pen marking a specific page. The handwriting matched the script on the back of the photograph, youthful but neat. It was a diary entry, dated November 15, 2002. Dad found out today. I've never seen him so angry. He called me terrible things, said I'd thrown my life away, said no daughter of his would make such a shameful choice. Mom just cried and wouldn't look at me. I tried to explain, I tried to make them understand I need them now more than ever, but Dad says I have to fix my mistake or leave his house. I don't know what to do. I'm so scared. Grace's hand trembled as she turned the page, but the rest was blank, the final entry in a life interrupted. She sat heavily on the edge of the bed, the gravity of what she was discovering pressing down on her like a physical weight. As she rose to leave, something caught her eye, a small object glinting beneath the desk. Kneeling, she retrieved a silver bracelet with a delicate charm, a pair of angel wings. Attached to it was a tiny folded note, the paper yellowed with age. Grace opened it carefully, revealing a message in Lynn's handwriting. "Dad, please forgive me. I needed you." The note had never been delivered. As she stepped back into the hallway, the scratches on the wall took on new meaning. The desperate marks of someone trying to get into a locked room, or perhaps the impotent rage of someone who had lost everything. In the kitchen, Grace noticed something she had missed before, a drawer slightly ajar beneath the counter. When she pulled it open, she found a small metal box. Inside lay a stack of medical documents, and on top, a positive pregnancy test dated October 2002. "Oh, Elliot," Grace whispered to the empty house, the pieces finally falling into terrible place. "What did you do?" Rain pattered against the windows of Shady Pines care home, transforming the afternoon light into a watery, shifting glow that made the institutional walls seem even more depressing. 2 days had passed since Grace's discovery at the abandoned Barnes homestead, and the weight of what she'd found there sat heavy in her chest like a stone. The pregnancy test, the diary, the scratched walls, the locked room preserved like a museum exhibit to a lost child. Each piece of evidence had coalesced into a picture of family tragedy that had haunted her thoughts and robbed her of sleep. Grace moved through her shift mechanically, dispensing medications and checking vital signs with practiced efficiency, while her mind remained fixed on Elliot Barnes and the mysterious phone number he repeated like a desperate prayer. She had tried various combinations, adding digits to the partial sequence he provided, but had reached only disconnected lines and confused strangers. During her lunch break, she sat alone in the staff room, spreading the items she'd collected on the table before her: the pregnancy test, Lynn's bracelet with the angel wings charm, and the never-delivered note. "Dad, please forgive me. I needed you." The words haunted her, simple but devastating in their undelivered plea. The door swung open suddenly, and Grace hurriedly gathered the items, shoving them back into her bag. Todd, the orderly whose contempt for Elliot seemed personal, stood in the doorway, his bulky frame blocking the exit. "Digging into things that don't concern you, Chen." His voice carried a warning edge that made the small hairs on the back of Grace's neck rise. "I'm not sure what you mean," she replied, trying to keep her voice steady. Todd stepped fully into the room, letting the door swing shut behind him. "Marion says you've been asking questions about Barnes, spending extra time with him." He moved closer, his posture deliberately intimidating. "Some advice? Let sleeping dogs lie." "Mr. Barnes is my patient," Grace said, standing her ground despite the nervous flutter in her stomach. "If there's something causing him distress that I can address." "You think you're helping?" Todd cut her off, his voice dropping to a harsh whisper. "You have no idea what kind of man he is, what he did." "Then tell me," Grace challenged, her professional demeanor slipping in the face of her frustration. "Everyone here seems to know something about Elliot Barnes that they're keeping secret. If you know why he's suffering, why he repeats that number—" "Because he deserves to suffer," Todd snapped, his face flushing with sudden anger. "Because some sins don't get forgiven, no matter how many times you dial a number or say you're sorry." He leaned in closer. "Some fathers don't deserve peace." Before Grace could respond, Marion's voice cut through the tension. "Nurse Chen, you're needed in room 14. Now." Todd stepped back, his expression quickly rearranging into professional neutrality. As Grace moved past him toward the door, he muttered under his breath, "Stay away from Barnes's past, for your own good." The confrontation left Grace shaken, but more determined than ever. Something was very wrong at Shady Pines, something beyond the usual challenges of understaffing and limited resources. The staff's attitude toward Elliot wasn't just indifference, it was active resentment, bordering on hostility. When her shift ended at 7 p.m., Grace found herself drawn back to the quiet reading room where she had often found Elliot sitting alone. Tonight was no different. He sat in the same worn armchair, his frail body silhouetted against the rain-streaked window, mumbling his mantra of numbers with increased urgency as a thunderstorm gathered strength outside. 3, 1, 8, 7, he whispered, his voice catching with desperation. Please, answer. Grace approached slowly, pulling a chair close to his. Mr. Barnes, she said softly. It's me, Grace. I went to your house. His roomy eyes widened slightly, a flash of clarity breaking through the fog. Did you find her? Not yet, Grace admitted, but I found some things that might help me. She hesitated, then made a decision. Mr. Barnes, Elliot, I think it's time we tried calling that number. The complete number. Elliot's reaction was immediate and visceral. His body went rigid, his breathing became rapid and shallow, and his gnarled hands clutched at the armrests with surprising strength. No, he gasped, the word erupting from somewhere deep and panicked. Not ready. Not ready. It's okay, Grace soothed, alarmed by his response. We don't have to do it right now. But Elliot was beyond hearing her reassurances. His agitation escalated rapidly, his thin chest heaving with exertion. She can't. What I did. Words spilled from him in broken fragments, his face contorted with anguish. Too late. Too late. His distress drew the attention of a passing nurse who quickly approached with concern. What's happening here? She demanded, her eyes narrowing as she recognized Grace. You're off shift, Chen. I was just visiting with Mr. Barnes, Grace explained, rising from her chair. He became upset. I think he might need something to calm him. The nurse, Janet Williams, an experienced staff member who generally kept to herself, assessed Elliot with professional detachment. I'll take care of it, she said, her tone making it clear that Grace should leave. As Grace reluctantly gathered her things, Janet administered a mild sedative to Elliot, whose agitation began to subside under the medication's influence. Before Grace could leave, however, Janet caught her arm. I don't know what you're doing, she said in a low voice, but that man doesn't have much time left. Grace stared at her, caught off guard by the unexpected confidence. What do you mean? Janet glanced around to ensure they weren't overheard. His last physical showed significant decline, heart failure, advancing rapidly. Dr. Patel gives him 3 months, maybe less. She released Grace's arm. Whatever you're planning, do it soon, or don't do it at all. The information hit Grace like a physical blow. 3 months, maybe less. The urgency of Elliot's repeated numbers, the desperation in his moments of clarity, it all took on a new, more painful significance. He was running out of time to make amends for whatever had happened with his daughter. That night, alone in her apartment, Grace spread the items from the Barnes household across her kitchen table again, adding the partial phone number Elliot repeated, 3 to 7. It wasn't enough for a complete number. Something was missing. On impulse, she pulled out her phone and dialed the local area code followed by 3 to 7, then hesitated, unsure how to complete the sequence. As thunder crashed outside her window, Grace thought again of Lynn's diary, the pregnancy test, the angel wings bracelet. What if? She added the digits 365, spelling angel, on a phone keypad. The phone rang once, twice, 3 times. Grace held her breath, her heart pounding. Then, hello? A woman's voice, cautious and slightly husky, answered. Grace froze, her mind suddenly blank. What should she say? How could she possibly explain this call? Hello? The voice repeated, impatience edging into the tone. Who is this? My name is Grace Chen, she finally managed. I'm a nurse at Shady Pines Care Home in Fayetteville, Arkansas. A long silence followed, so complete that Grace wondered if the call had been disconnected. Then, the woman's voice returned, transformed by shock and disbelief. "Is this about my father?" The words were barely above a whisper. "Elliot Barnes?" "Yes," Grace confirmed, her own voice trembling with the magnitude of the moment. "He's been trying to reach you. For years he's been repeating your number." Another long pause, filled only with the sound of uneven breathing. Then, "I can't do this." The words were choked, strained through what sounded like tears. "I can't." The line went dead. Grace sat motionless, the phone still pressed to her ear, listening to the empty dial tone. She had found Lynn Barnes. After 7 years of Elliot's desperate attempts, she had made the connection he couldn't. But instead of resolution, the brief exchange had only deepened the mystery. Whatever had happened between father and daughter went beyond a simple falling out. The raw pain in Lynn's voice, even after all these years, spoke of wounds too deep for easy healing. Grace set down her phone and gazed out at the storm that mirrored the turbulence she had just unleashed. "If I don't call back," she whispered to her empty apartment, "that man is going to die alone with his ghosts." With newfound determination, she picked up her phone and dialed again. The call rang 5 times before being sent to voicemail. Grace tried again and again, each attempt meeting the same electronic wall of rejection. By the 3rd try, she accepted that Lynn Barnes had no intention of speaking with her, at least not tonight. Rain continued to lash against the windows of her apartment, turning the world outside into a blurred watercolor of streetlights and shadows. Thunder growled in the distance, moving away but leaving behind an electric tension in the air that matched Grace's internal turmoil. She couldn't let this go. Not now. Not when she was so close. If Lynn wouldn't speak to her by phone, perhaps she would respond to a more tangible message. Grace composed a text message, agonizing over each word. "Lynn, I understand your reluctance, but your father is dying. Whatever happened between you, and I've seen enough to guess it was terrible, he has been trying to reach you for 7 years. Every day he repeats your number like a prayer. He may have only months left. I'm not asking you to forgive him, just to hear him, before it's too late for both of you. Grace Chen, Shady Pines Care Home." She hit send before she could second-guess herself, then sat back, watching rain streak down her window in crooked rivulets that distorted the world beyond. Perhaps it was better this way, to let sleeping wounds lie, to not reopen old traumas. Who was she to decide what Lynn Barnes needed? What gave her the right to intervene in a family tragedy she only partially understood? Yet the image of Elliot, fragile, desperate, trapped in a prison of guilt and fading memory, wouldn't leave her. There was something profoundly wrong about letting a man die without the chance for reconciliation, or at least closure. Her phone buzzed suddenly, startling her from her thoughts. A text from Lynn. "Where did you find my number?" Grace's pulse quickened as she typed her response. "Your father repeats it constantly. 3187. I tried different combinations until Angel worked. Because of your bracelet with the angel wings charm I found at your old home." Minutes passed with excruciating slowness before Lynn replied. "You went to the house?" "Yes. I found your diary. The pregnancy test. I know he forced you to leave when you were pregnant." This time the response came faster. "You don't know anything." Grace hesitated, then took a risk. "I know enough to understand why you might never want to speak to him again. But I also know he's been trapped in that moment for 7 years, calling out to you even as his mind fades. It's killing him." 3 dots appeared, disappeared, then reappeared as Lynn composed, deleted, and reconsidered her response. Finally, "Address?" Grace sent the details for Shady Pines, her hands trembling slightly. She added, "When will you come?" The reply was immediate and final. "I don't know that I will." Then silence. Grace spent a restless night, her dreams filled with scratched walls and locked doors, of voices calling out across unbridgeable distances. When morning came, she moved through her pre-work routine mechanically, her mind elsewhere. The rain had stopped, leaving behind a world washed clean but somehow more subdued, as if the storm had drained the color from everything. At Shady Pines, she found Elliot in the common room, more disheveled than usual. His thin hair stuck up in unruly tufts, and his sweater was buttoned incorrectly, creating an asymmetrical line down his chest. His hands trembled more violently, and his mumblings had taken on a frantic quality that spoke of deterioration. 3, 1, 8, 7. Please, running out of time. Grace knelt beside him, placing a gentle hand over his. Mr. Barnes, she said softly. Elliot, I found Lynn. His head snapped up, roomy eyes suddenly sharp with a clarity that hadn't been present for days. You found her? Yes, Grace confirmed, her voice barely above a whisper. I called the number you've been repeating. I added Angel to complete it. She watched his face carefully. She answered. Elliot's reaction was complex, a symphony of emotions playing across his weathered features. Hope, fear, shame, longing, each rose to the surface and then submerged again, too quickly for anyone to take dominance. What did she say? His voice cracked on the final word. Grace hesitated, unwilling to crush the fragile hope that had momentarily lifted his spirits. She was surprised, she said carefully. It's been a long time. Is she coming? The naked desperation in the question pierced Grace like a physical pain. I don't know, she answered honestly. She asked for the address, but she didn't promise anything. Elliot nodded slowly, as if this was exactly the response he had expected, perhaps even the one he believed he deserved. I wouldn't come either, he whispered, more to himself than to Grace. His gaze drifted toward the window, where morning sunlight struggled to penetrate the institutional blinds. I said terrible things, did terrible things. What happened, Elliot? Grace asked gently, seizing this moment of lucidity. What happened with Lynn? The question seemed to trigger something in him, a flood of memories that both pained and clarified. He straightened slightly in his chair, his voice stronger than Grace had ever heard it. She was 17, he began, each word carefully formed as if he were constructing a confession. Senior year, college scholarships coming. First in the family to have a chance at university. Pride briefly illuminated his face before darkening again. Then she came home one night, crying. Said she was pregnant. Boyfriend was some boy from school, already enlisted, shipping out to basic training. His hands twisted together in his lap, knuckles whitening. I was so angry. Not at her, not really, at myself. For failing her, for not protecting her. But I didn't say that. His voice dropped to a pained whisper. I called her terrible names. Said she'd thrown everything away. Said no daughter of mine. He trailed off, the memory visibly causing him physical pain. I gave her a choice. Get rid of it or get out of my house. Grace remained silent, sensing he needed to continue without interruption. It was November, cold. Margaret was crying, begging me to calm down. But I wouldn't listen. Lynn packed a bag. Said she'd never come back. Said angels punish bad fathers. A tear tracked down his sunken cheek. I locked her door after she left. Kept it like a museum. Thought she'd come back when she saw how hard the world was. Thought she'd thank me one day for being firm. His gaze refocused on Grace, surprisingly sharp despite the clouding of cataracts and confusion. But she never came back. Margaret left me a year later. Couldn't forgive me. Died of cancer in 2010. He tried to reach for Grace's hand but lacked the coordination. For 7 years I've been trying to remember her number. Alzheimer's takes everything, but not that. Not her number. It was the only thing I could hold on to. Grace felt tears gathering in her own eyes. The tragedy of it, the stubborn pride, the harsh words that couldn't be taken back, the years of regret, was almost unbearable in its needless waste of love and connection. I just want to say I'm sorry, Elliot whispered, his momentary clarity already beginning to fade. Before I forget who she is, before I forget who I am. The sound of heels clicking on linoleum interrupted the moment. Marion Winters approached, her face a mask of professional disapproval. "Nurse Chen, a word?" It wasn't a request. In the hallway outside, Marion's control slipped, revealing genuine anger beneath her administrative exterior. "You called Lynn Barnes?" Grace straightened her spine, refusing to be intimidated. "Yes. After I explicitly told you to leave this alone." "He's dying," Grace countered, keeping her voice low but firm. "He deserves the chance to make peace with his daughter before he goes." Marion's expression hardened. "Do you have any idea what you've done? Lynn Barnes has spent years building a life away from her father's influence. You've just ripped open wounds that took years to heal." "With all due respect," Grace interrupted, "that should be Lynn's decision, not yours. Not mine either. But at least I gave her the choice." Something shifted in Marion's eyes, a flicker of resignation, perhaps even respect. "Todd is Lynn's cousin," she said after a pause. "Elliot's nephew. He saw firsthand what that winter did to her, pregnant and alone. The family never forgave Elliot." The revelation clicked several pieces into place for Grace. Todd's animosity, the staff's collective cold shoulder, the sense that Elliot was being punished beyond the natural consequences of his actions. "I understand your protective instinct," Grace said quietly. "But keeping them apart serves no one now, not with so little time left." Marion seemed about to argue further when the front doors of Shady Pines swung open. A woman in her mid-30s entered, her posture tense with apprehension. She wore simple jeans and a gray sweater, her brown hair cut in a practical bob that framed a face both familiar and changed from the teenage photograph in Elliot's Bible. Behind her, a teenage boy, perhaps 15, hovered uncertainly, his features a striking blend of Lynn's and someone else's. Lynn Barnes had come home after all, and she had brought Elliot's grandson with her. The common room of Shady Pines fell silent as Lynn Barnes stepped through the doorway. Conversations paused mid-sentence, the television's drone suddenly seemed too loud, and even the institutional clock on the wall appeared to hesitate between ticks. Lynn stood frozen just past the threshold, her body tense as a drawn bow. Behind her, the teenage boy, tall and lanky with the awkward grace of adolescence, shifted uncomfortably, clearly uncertain about his role in this unfolding drama. Grace moved toward them quickly, grateful for something to do in the charged silence. "Ms. Barnes, I'm Grace Chen. We spoke on the phone." Lynn's eyes, the same deep brown as her father's had once been, scanned the room with the wariness of someone entering enemy territory. "Where is he?" The words were clipped, carefully controlled, as if she was rationing the emotional energy each syllable cost her. "This way," Grace said softly, gesturing toward where Elliot sat by the window. "He's having a relatively clear morning, but—" She hesitated, wanting to prepare Lynn without deterring her. "The Alzheimer's can cause his lucidity to come and go unpredictably." Lynn nodded once, sharply, absorbing this information with a stiffened jaw. She turned to the boy behind her. "Wait here, Matt." "Mom, He began to protest. "Please." The word contained years of unspoken context, and the boy subsided, retreating to a chair near the entrance where he could observe from a distance. Lynn took a deep breath, squaring her shoulders like someone preparing to dive into icy water. "Let's go," she said to Grace, though her voice had acquired a slight tremor that betrayed the calm exterior she fought to maintain. As they approached Elliot's chair, Grace noticed how Lynn's steps grew shorter, more hesitant, as if some invisible force was simultaneously pulling her forward and holding her back. 15 feet away, 10 feet, 5. With each step, Grace could feel the weight of 17 years of silence growing heavier in the space between father and daughter. Elliot hadn't noticed them yet. He remained focused on the window, mumbling his familiar string of numbers, his gnarled fingers worrying at the threadbare armrest of his chair. The morning sunlight illuminated the translucent quality his skin had acquired in recent weeks, a physical manifestation of his fading presence. "Mr. Barnes," Grace said gently when they reached him. "You have a visitor." Elliot turned slowly, his movements carrying the deliberate care of someone navigating a world grown suddenly fragile. When his rheumy eyes fell on Lynn, his entire body went still. Not the frozen tension of his daughter's posture, but the perfect stillness of someone afraid the slightest movement might shatter a miracle. Lynn? The name emerged as barely a whisper, as if he feared speaking it too loudly might cause her to evaporate. Lynn didn't speak. She stood rigidly, arms crossed tightly across her chest, a posture of self-protection rather than defiance. Up close, Grace could see the fine lines around her eyes, the slight silvering at her temples that had been disguised by her brown hair from a distance. 17 years had transformed the tearful teenager from the photograph into this contained, watchful woman. "Is it really you?" Elliot's voice trembled, his hands reaching out involuntarily before he caught himself and withdrew them to his lap. I was afraid you wouldn't come." "I almost didn't," Lynn replied, her voice flat but with undercurrents of emotion too complex to name. She made no move to take the visitor's chair beside him. Elliot nodded slowly, accepting this as his due. "I understand," he said, and for a moment, he seemed more present, more coherent than Grace had ever seen him. "I wouldn't have come either." The simple acknowledgement seemed to catch Lynn off guard. She blinked rapidly, her crossed arms tightening further. "The nurse said you've been trying to call me for years." 7 years, Elliot confirmed, his voice strengthening with the effort of holding on to clarity. "Since the diagnosis, I was afraid I'd forget your number, forget you." His hands trembled more violently. "I kept writing it down, kept saying it, but the disease, it takes pieces of you, chunks of your life just disappear." A complex emotion flickered across Lynn's face, something that might have been pity, quickly suppressed. "Why call now?" she asked, and despite her efforts, a note of raw hurt entered her voice. "Why not 10 years ago? 15? Elliot's gaze dropped to his hands that had once been strong enough to push his daughter away, now reduced to trembling appendages he could barely control. "Pride," he said simply. "Stubborn, stupid pride. Thinking you'd come back on your own, thinking I was right." He looked up again, his eyes suddenly bright with unshed tears. "Then Margaret left. She never forgave me for what I did to you. By the time I realized how wrong I'd been, I thought it was too late." Lynn's careful composure wavered visibly. Her shoulders, which had been held rigidly straight, began to sag under the weight of memories. "You threw me out," she said, her voice now barely above a whisper. "It was snowing. I was 17 and pregnant and terrified. I needed my father, and you—" Her voice broke, and she pressed her lips together tightly. "I know," Elliot whispered, a tear finally escaping to track down his sunken cheek. "I know what I did." The stark admission hung in the air between them, neither accusation nor excuse. Simply truth, unvarnished and painful. Grace began to step away, feeling suddenly intrusive in this raw moment of reckoning. But Elliot's hand shot out with surprising quickness, catching her wrist. "Stay," he pleaded, his eyes momentarily clouding with confusion before clearing again. "Please, I might lose the thread." Understanding, Grace nodded and remained nearby, a silent anchor to the present as father and daughter confronted their shared past. Lynn finally lowered herself into the visitor's chair, though she sat at its edge as if preparing for quick escape. "I stayed with Aunt Carol that winter," she said after a long pause. "Had to drop out of school, lost my scholarship, had the baby in June, a boy." Something softened in her expression at the mention of her child. Matthew Robert Barnes. Elliot's face transformed at these words, hunger for connection overriding everything else. "A grandson," he breathed, the concept clearly both wonderful and devastating in its newness. Is he here?" Lynn hesitated, then nodded toward the entrance where the teenager waited, pretending to be absorbed in his phone while obviously monitoring the situation from a distance. "He wanted to come." He's curious about where he comes from. Elliot tried to look past her to see the boy, his neck craning with the effort. When he caught a glimpse of his grandson, his entire body seemed to collapse inward, overcome by the enormity of what he had missed. Childhood, adolescence, 15 years of a life he should have known from its beginning. "He has your father's chin," he observed, his voice breaking. "My father's chin." This unexpected connection to lineage seemed to reach Lynn in a way nothing else had. Her careful facade cracked, revealing the wounded girl who still lived beneath the composed woman. "I wanted to call you when he was born," she admitted, the words tumbling out as if they'd been waiting years to be spoken. "But I was still so angry, so hurt." "You had every right to be," Elliot said, his momentary clarity giving weight to his words. I was wrong, Lynn. So terribly wrong." His trembling hands reached for hers, stopping just short of contact. I was raised certain ways. Thought I knew what was right. Thought I was protecting your future." His voice dropped to a whisper. "But I was just afraid. Afraid of what people would think. Afraid I'd failed as a father. And in my fear, I did fail you. Completely." Lynn's hands remained in her lap, not reaching to meet his, but not pulling away either. "I wanted you to be proud of me," she said, her voice small and suddenly young. "Even after everything, even after Matt was born, I got my GED, worked 2 jobs, put myself through community college at night, got a nursing degree." A hint of defiance entered her tone. "I made something of myself, no thanks to you." Elliot nodded, pride and shame warring in his expression. "Your mother would have been so proud," he whispered. "She never forgave me. She was right not to." "Why did you keep my room?" Lynn asked suddenly, the question clearly one that had troubled her. "Grace said it was preserved exactly as I left it." "At first, because I thought you'd come back," Elliot admitted, his gaze dropping. "Then, as a punishment for myself, a reminder. Every day I'd unlock the door, look inside, remember what I'd done." His voice grew fainter. "I kept it clean, bought flowers sometimes. It was the only way I knew how to say sorry when I couldn't find you." Lynn's careful composure finally broke. A single sob escaped her, quickly stifled but powerful enough to shake her entire frame. "I wanted to hate you forever," she whispered, tears now flowing freely down her cheeks. "It was easier that way." "You should hate me," Elliot said simply. "I deserve it." Lynn shook her head slowly, the motion releasing more tears. "Hating you has been exhausting," she admitted. "I've carried it so long I don't know who I'd be without it." Elliot's focus began to drift, the clarity receding as the disease reasserted its relentless claim on his mind. 3, 1, 8, 7. He began to mumble, his gaze growing distant. "Dad?" Lynn's voice sharpened with concern, using the parental title for the first time. "Dad, stay with me." The familiar address seemed to pull him back from the edge of confusion. He blinked rapidly, focusing on her face with visible effort. "Lynn," he said, recognition returning. I'm losing the thread again." "It's okay," she said, and in a gesture that cost her visibly, she finally reached out and took one of his hands in hers. "I'm here now." Elliot stared at their joined hands as if witnessing something miraculous. "I'm so sorry," he whispered, his breath coming in labored gasps as emotion overwhelmed his frail body. "For everything. For what I did. For the years we lost." "I know," Lynn said simply, her fingers tightening around his. "The boy. Matthew." Elliot struggled to hold on to his thoughts. "Can I meet him?" Lynn hesitated, then nodded. "Matt," she called, turning toward the entrance. "Come here, please." 3 weeks later, the first snow of the season drifted down from a pewter sky, transforming the grounds of Fayetteville Community Cemetery into a landscape of gentle white curves and softened edges. The small gathering huddled beside a freshly dug grave, their dark coats stark against the pristine snow like ink spots on white paper. Elliot Barnes had passed away in his sleep 4 days earlier, just before Thanksgiving. His final moments had been peaceful, a small mercy that Grace found herself grateful for as she stood slightly apart from the mourners, watching Lynn Barnes adjust her son's tie with the automatic fussiness of a mother who needs something to do with her hands in moments of overwhelming emotion. The funeral was small, painfully small for a life that had spanned 78 years. Besides Grace, Lynn, and Matthew, only a handful of others had come. Todd, whose hostility had mellowed to a quiet resignation in the weeks following Lynn's return. Janet, the night nurse who had warned Grace of Elliot's limited time. Rosemary Hopkins, the elderly resident who had known fragments of Elliot's story, and a middle-aged couple Grace didn't recognize, who Lynn had introduced simply as old neighbors. No minister presided over the service. Elliot had apparently lapsed from whatever faith had once informed his strict moral code. Instead, Lynn herself stood at the head of the grave, her breath forming small clouds in the freezing air as she prepared to speak. The wind tugged at her black coat and ruffled Matthew's hair, carrying the scent of pine from the nearby trees. "My father was not a perfect man," Lynn began, her voice steady despite the emotion that tightened her features. "He made a terrible mistake that cost us 17 years we can never get back." She paused, her gaze moving to the simple casket, its surface already dusted with snow. "But in these last few weeks I learned something I never expected. Forgiveness isn't a gift you give someone else. It's one you give yourself." Grace watched Matthew's face as his mother spoke. The boy had met his grandfather only a handful of times before Elliot's final decline, yet there was a solemnity in his expression that spoke of understanding beyond his 15 years. He had inherited the Barnes family chin, strong and slightly squared, but his eyes were gentle, observant in a way that reminded Grace of how Lynn looked at her patients. "When I left home that November night," Lynn continued, "I was carrying not just a child, but a burden of rage that I thought would sustain me. I nursed that anger, protected it, let it define me for 17 years. Her voice caught slightly. "I wanted my father to suffer as I had suffered. And in some ways he did. Alone in that care facility, repeating my phone number like a lifeline to something he'd lost." Snow collected on the shoulders of the mourners, none of them moving to brush it away, as if accepting this natural shroud as part of the ritual. "What I never expected," Lynn said, "was that my anger would become my prison, not his. That in trying to punish him, I was really punishing myself and my son, who deserved to know his family, however flawed." She looked at Matthew, reaching out to squeeze his hand. "3 weeks ago, I came to Shady Pines ready to confront a monster from my past. Instead, I found a frail old man who had been punishing himself far more effectively than I ever could." Grace thought back to those final weeks, how Elliot had rallied briefly after Lynn's first visit, how his periods of lucidity had grown longer when Matthew came to see him. They had formed a tentative connection, grandfather and grandson, building a fragile bridge across the chasm of lost years. Matthew had brought his school photos to show Elliot, and the old man had touched each one with reverent fingers, as if handling precious artifacts from a civilization he'd only read about. "I didn't come here today to canonize my father," Lynn continued, her voice stronger now. "What he did was wrong. The hardship he caused was real. But I did come to acknowledge something it took me too long to realize. Holding on to hatred doesn't protect you from pain. It prolongs it." She withdrew from her coat pocket the small silver bracelet with the angel wings charm that Grace had found in Lynn's preserved bedroom. "I wore this the night I left home. I told my father that angels punish bad fathers." She looked down at the bracelet glinting in her palm, snowflakes melting against the warm metal. "But angels don't punish, do they? They liberate. And today, I'm choosing liberation over punishment. For him, for me, for all of us caught in this story." With deliberate gentleness, Lynn placed the bracelet atop the casket, the small wings catching the weak winter sunlight in a brief flash of brilliance before being slowly covered by falling snow. The small group stood in silence for several minutes after Lynn finished speaking. There were no hymns, no formal prayers, just the soft percussion of snowflakes landing on wool coats and the occasional distant call of a bird seeking shelter from the strengthening storm. As the cemetery workers approached, indicating it was time for the final lowering of the casket, Lynn turned to Grace. "He asked for you at the end," she said quietly. "During one of his last clear moments. He wanted to thank you for finding me." Grace felt unexpected tears prick her eyes. "I wasn't sure I was doing the right thing," she admitted. "Reaching out to you, disturbing your life after all this time. I wasn't sure either," Lynn replied with a small, sad smile. "Part of me wanted to delete your messages, pretend I never saw them. It would have been easier." She glanced at Matthew, who was now placing a small stone atop the casket. A gesture he'd explained was from his Jewish roommate's tradition, a sign that someone had visited, that the deceased was remembered. But the easy path isn't always the right one. As the small gathering began to disperse, making their way carefully across the snow-covered ground toward waiting cars, Lynn lingered. From her bag, she withdrew the worn photograph from Elliot's Bible, the image of herself as a tearful teenager on the porch of their old home. She held it for a long moment, then placed it carefully on the casket beside the angel wings bracelet. "I forgive you," she whispered, the words visible as vapor in the cold air. "Not because you deserved it, but because I needed to say it." Grace waited at a respectful distance, watching as Lynn stood silent vigil, while cemetery workers lowered the casket into the frozen ground. Only when the first shovelfuls of earth began to fall did Lynn turn away, wiping tears from her cheeks with gloved hands. "Are you ready?" Matthew asked his mother, offering his arm with a maturity beyond his years. Lynn nodded, linking her arm through his. "Yes," she said. "I think I finally am." As they walked together toward the cemetery gates, the snow falling more heavily now, Grace was struck by the symmetry of it all. A winter departure and a winter return. The circle finally complete after 17 years. The cold that had once driven them apart now wrapped around them like a blanket, preserving this moment of reconciliation in crystalline perfection. In the parking lot, Lynn paused beside Grace's car. "Thank you," she said simply, "for not giving up on him when everyone else had, for making that call when I couldn't." "Will you be all right?" Grace asked, studying the face that had become familiar over these past weeks of hospital visits and quiet conversations in Elliot's room. Lynn looked up at the snow drifting down from the endless gray sky, then at her son waiting patiently by their car. A small, genuine smile touched her lips, perhaps the first unburdened smile she'd allowed herself in years. "Yes," she said with quiet certainty. "We will be." As Grace drove away from the cemetery, she glanced in her rearview mirror to see Lynn and Matthew standing together beside their car, snowflakes swirling around them like tiny stars falling to earth. They weren't touching, but they stood close, unified in a way that suggested healing had begun. Not complete, not perfect, but real. The falling snow was already beginning to cover their footprints, erasing the evidence of their presence just as time would eventually smooth the sharpest edges of pain and regret. But beneath that softening blanket, the truth remained. That some chasms can be bridged, some wounds can be healed, and sometimes, a simple 7-digit number repeated for 7 years can finally connect two hearts that were never meant to be separated. As the snow falls gently on Elliot's grave, covering both the angel wing bracelet and the photograph of a tearful teenage Lynn, we're reminded that some of life's most profound tragedies aren't caused by villains or monsters, but by ordinary people making mistakes they're too proud to correct until it's almost too late. 7 years of repeating a number, 17 years of nursing anger. What prisons do we build for ourselves out of pride, fear, and the stubborn belief that we're right? Would you have made the call if you were Grace? Would you have answered if you were Lynn? Or would you have let the silence stretch on, a chasm growing wider with each passing year? Perhaps the most devastating question of all, how many of us are, right now, one phone call away from healing a wound we've allowed to fester for far too long? The time we lose can never be recovered. Elliot never saw his grandson grow up. Lynn never had her father's support when she needed it most. But forgiveness, as Lynn discovered, isn't about changing the past. It's about liberating yourself for the future. If this story touched your heart today, if it made you think about a call you need to make or one you need to answer, don't wait for someone like Grace to intervene. Share this video with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe to our channel for more stories that challenge and inspire. And leave a comment letting us know if there's someone in your life who deserves a second chance. Because sometimes, the bravest thing we can do is to break the silence before it's too late.